This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week, the first of two interviews with single-panel cartoonists as I talk to the New Yorker's Joe Dator. We'll cover how Monty Python and the Holy Grail scarred him for life, his influences, and his experience taking art class from Harvey Kurtzman, why I wouldn't be good at writing New Yorker cartoons, the cartoonists' Mount Everest, the influence of and inspiration for The Far Side, and more. But first, remember that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. More of you have been using this link lately, so thanks a lot for your support.
Yeah, this is our first time meeting.
Yeah.
We're just going to go right into this.
Right. Well, I thought I would start by kind of, I'm recording now. I thought I'd start by introducing or kind of talking about how we got in touch, because it is sort of a case of everything overlapping with each other.
Gosh.
So we are both listeners to Crap from the Past, which is a radio show from Minneapolis on KFAI. Which, by the way, I don't know, listeners with somewhat long memories might remember that I was on another KFAI show, the show that comes on after Ron's show, True Brit. I don't know if you've ever listened to that.
I occasionally listen to that with what's his name, Simon
Husbands. Yeah. So yes, from listening to Crap from the Past, then I started listening to True Brit too, and then I was emailing with Simon, and then when I said I was going to be in town, then he invited me on his show. That was beginning of 2014.
Oh, okay.
So now you had Ron on your podcast. Songs You're Sick Of.
Songs You're Sick Of. That's the show where we discuss, dissect, and dismember classic rock.
And so then Ron played his appearance on your show on his show. And so
he played almost the whole thing. For some reason, the last 5 minutes got cut off. I don't know why.
Yeah, it just kind of ended. And he was like, what? Is that how it ends?
And he missed the part where I graciously thanked him for being on the show. I felt really bad about that.
So I heard your show on his show, and so then I started listening to your show.
You mean Songs You're Sick Of, the show where we just dissect and dismember classic rock.
Yes, that one. And by the way, one of the people you've had on your show, Alex Robinson, was an early guest on my show.
Oh, that's interesting.
Back in 2008.
He's a cartoonist, and in the cartooning world, it's a small world, and everybody knows everybody else in cartooning. Mm-hmm. And I know pretty much everybody in cartooning because at one point I met one person in cartooning. And then from there, you know everybody in cartooning, basically.
Yeah, that's kind of how it goes.
Well, I know the funny thing is I ended up doing my podcast because of Alex. Because Alex and his partner, this guy Pete the Retailer, they do a show called the Star Wars Minute. Mm-hmm. Where they do this bizarre thing that they came up with where they will go through the movie Star Wars minute by minute and do a separate podcast about each individual minute of the movie. And that they started about 4 years ago, and that snowballed into a phenomenon where now there's all these imitators doing other movies minute by minute, basically using their format. So, and it's become kind of their day job now to do this. And so
Who needs cartooning?
Well, I hope someone does. Yeah. That is, you ask a good question there. Who needs God, I hope there's an answer.
I mean, not that podcasting is making me much money, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the checks to start rolling in. I don't know why they haven't come yet. I've been podcasting for a year. So I started going on their show as a guest because I'm an obsessive Star Wars fan. As a matter of fact, I should sidebar, the reason I discovered Crap from the Past, Ron Boogie Monster Gerber, was that I was online searching like 10 years ago for the Miko Disco Star Wars record, and the Googling it led me to a playlist of Ron's from one of his shows where he did an hour-and-a-half long tribute to Star Wars and all music related to Star Wars, and I listened to that show, and that got me hooked on Crap from the Past. So it's all weirdly connected.
I see.
Yeah,
actually, I found Crap from the Past because somebody who I interviewed introduced me to it. My friend Ed, who is now living in Chicago, he was living in Tokyo at the time.
Well, I'm glad that word of mouth has worked its magic again, and you found my show, and now here I am on yours.
Yeah. And
that makes me so happy that happened.
Yeah. And so since you are a cartoonist, I thought I'd have you on my show. And now you're doing primarily single panel cartoons?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 10 years. I've been at the New Yorker. I just had my 10th anniversary of appearing in the New Yorker in August.
Wow. Okay.
That's almost exclusively for the New Yorker, although as of last year, I've been appearing in Mad, too.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I read Mad. I guess the last time I looked at Mad, I didn't know your name yet, so I'm gonna have to go back and look at Mad and look for your comics.
Well, I've only been in Mad 3 times. I don't even I hesitate to count myself among the quote unquote idiots of the Usual Gang of Idiots fame. But although the people at Mad are very, very nice, and they basically said if you're a contributor, you're one of us. You're part of the idiots. So that's. But I feel like, comparing myself to the giants of Mad, who I grew up with, certainly is not appropriate. I've only been in magazine, a handful of times, and with my single panel gags that I've done, and nothing like the great, amazing work that's been done by the veterans there. So, but I'll take it. Once you're through the velvet rope, you're good, and I'll take that because it's a thrill to be in Mad magazine.
Yeah. One of the few cases where it's a compliment to be called an idiot.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it's not a bad thing to be. It's probably helpful in this day and age.
Yes.
Remind me of the Neil Innes song "How Sweet to Be an Idiot."
I think I've heard that before. So single panel cartoons are a little bit of a different animal because they're not sequential art. Although sometimes I've seen single panel cartoonists who will break their panel into 2 or more panels and then it becomes sequential art. Like Hank Ketcham used to do it in Dennis the Menace sometimes. Family Circus has done it. Tom Towles, the political cartoonist, has done that. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. But what attracted you to doing single panel cartoons?
I'll be very blunt. I could. I mean, that's really it. I've done a lot of things over the years and sort of trying to find a thing that I could excel at. And at some point I met and hooked up with Bob Mankoff, who is now currently the cartoon editor of the New Yorker. But at the time I met him, he was just one of the cartoonists. And he I worked for him a bit, and he became a mentor to me and taught me a great deal about it. And he was very encouraging and very supportive all those years ago. And he thought I could be a cartoonist for the New Yorker before I thought I could, and was helpful in that way. And so it became a thing where it was just a serendipitous thing of, I wanted to be funny, and I had a talent for drawing. And right at the right time, at that point about 10 years ago, Mankoff said, Joe, you should submit cartoons to the New Yorker. Why would you not do that? And that was a very good question, and I didn't answer for it. And so I did, and I thought, yeah, this felt right. This was the thing I want to do at this moment in my life. But to be honest, I grew up not really idolizing cartoonists or wanting to be a cartoonist. I always idolized comedians. When I was growing up, my idols were Monty Python, and Steve Martin. Steve Martin, of course, you can guess my age based on this. Obviously, I grew up in the '70s, so
we're about the same age.
George Carlin was a huge thing for me. George Carlin, and I remember seeing the Marx Brothers when I was a very little kid. My dad took me to see Animal Crackers when it was released in theaters in the early '70s. The Marx Brothers had a kind of a revival in the '70s. And at the time, Groucho was still alive, so he was appearing at some theaters sometimes when they would show his old movies. And I remember my dad taking me to see Animal Crackers when I was a little kid, and I had no idea what I was about to see, and it just changed my life, And I think what happened with me with comedians was somebody made a terrible decision and took me to see Monty Python's and the Holy Grail when I was way too young to see it. It was probably when it first came out, so I was probably about 8 years old. And you remember the scene where King Arthur fights the Black Knight, and John Cleese plays the Black Knight, and by the end of the fight, all of his limbs are gone.
Yeah.
He won't give up. He's relenting and saying, it's nothing. It's just a flesh wound. Of course, it's a classic scene. Well, I was too young to understand that was special effects. So this greatly affected me. I was at once impressed and traumatized, and I thought, comedians are the most amazing people. That guy in that movie allowed somebody to remove all of his limbs for a joke. I thought that made them better than superheroes, better than rock stars, better than the most intimidating. They were the ultimate badass. A comedian, there was nobody cooler, because a comedian would go to any length.
Suffer for his art.
Yeah, and I think that changed my life. I was pretty young, so I think that was it. All I knew was, I wanted to be funny. But I liked Mad Magazine when I was a kid. I didn't discover the New Yorker until many, many years later. But as a kid, I read Mad. I loved Don Martin. Don Martin was always my favorite in Mad. And I can see, when I look at my work now, I can see a Don Martin influence. It seems kind of out of left field. I don't think people can see it, but I can see it. I can tell what I got from Don Martin in my own work. There's a kind of I always try to make my lines very clean, and he always did that. And there's a kind of a way of drawing inanimate objects that he had where they were very recognizable, very sort of, he would draw an iconic version of a telephone, even though it didn't look like a real telephone, but it looked like a cartoon telephone. And then there was the concept of putting grotesquerie into that. His cartoons always involved something very odd and grotesque. They would seem very cute with those weird faces, those elongated heads and the hinged feet and the people with their goofy faces and everything. But then there'd be somebody would get disemboweled and there's just a disgusting pile of guts coming out of their stomach or something, and you'd be shocked by the violence in Don Martin cartoons. There was always something weird and grotesque going on that sort of shocked you. So, and again, going back to Monty Python with the arms coming off and the legs coming off, it was always funny to me and shocking. I guess the shock was what made it so funny for me. So Don Martin was always a big deal. Of course, years later, I went to SVA in New York, and one of my teachers there was Harvey Kurtzman.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sure if you're interviewing cartoonists, you've met a lot of people who knew Harvey Kurtzman because he taught in New York in the 80s. And so a lot of us took his class. I think our mutual friend Alex Robinson probably is among that group. So, you got to meet Harvey Kurtzman by taking that class, and that was one of the great values of that class, was just getting to be around Harvey. And he was a great guy. I sort of caught him towards the end of his life, though, so I didn't really get the best version of him. At that point, he was very affected by illness. He had Parkinson's for a few years, so he wasn't the man he was 10 years earlier, and it was very sad to see. But it was a thrill just to know him, and I went up to his house a few times and got to know his family a little bit. And I have great memories of Harvey. But what I did find out was he hated Don Martin. Hated his work. I thought it was was crap. Harvey was a very, very demanding guy. He had very discerning taste, and he would not let anyone off the hook. He would just he demanded excellence from all of his artists who worked for him. And that's why the people who worked for him were only the best. He had Willie Elder, who was also, I think, again, another cartoonist who influenced me due to his great draftsmanship, but also his insistence on drawing disgusting things. He was amazing at drawing disgusting things. There'd always be somebody would always be naked too for some reason. I know why he'd do that, but if you'd look at his tableau, if it was a crowd scene, I guarantee you somebody would be naked for no reason. And he would draw each. If it was a man, he would draw each little hair on the legs, just individual hair on the legs. And if it was a woman, same thing, each individual hair on the legs. He didn't discriminate. So, he would have people like Willie Elder, and Wally Wood, would be one of Kurtzman's artists, and John Severin. And yet he clashed with John Severin because he didn't feel like John Severin was holding up his end, and that was how demanding Harvey was. John Severin didn't quite make the grade for him.
Yikes!
Pretty amazing guy, but he was he was great to be around, and mostly the class that I remember I remember much happening in the class. The weird thing about that class was Harvey Kurtzman taught what I do now. He taught satirical gag cartoons, which he never did, and which he was never really involved with. But that was what he taught, and what I remember the most of it was him sort of explaining what a joke is, and his explanation was very simple. He would take a balloon, and he would blow up the balloon, and he would keep blowing air into the balloon until it popped. And of course, by the time I knew him, he had his assistant do it because he couldn't really do it anymore. But the point was that it was about escalation. You would just take a premise, and then you would escalate it, and escalate it until it would just naturally pop on its own. You wouldn't even need a pin. It would just, you'd get to a point, escalation had reached a point of absurdity so far that the punchline would just be right in front of you. You wouldn't even have to force it, And that was a great lesson to learn about how to tell a joke. And I remember from that class were very general things like that, and also just the work ethic that he demanded was impressive. I wish I had been able to absorb that part of it more, because I don't have anything close to the work ethic that he had.
So, but doing a single panel cartoon, I mean, that one panel has a lot of work to do. I mean, you don't have, additional panels to get your joke across, or your story, whatever very short story there is there. And also, I was thinking, as I didn't sleep very well last night, and I was thinking about a joke that I thought of a long time ago and how I would try to present it in one panel. And because it seems like there are lots of ways you could do it, and some would be funnier than others. But so here's the joke. It's just a stupid pun like I usually make. So you know what a bistro is, a restaurant.
Sure.
But the very first time I ever heard that word, when I was in high school.
Well, what is a bistro compared to a restaurant? I mean, I've never understood that term. I've seen restaurant reviews where they say, it's another bistro. And I'm like, what? Well, why is that different from a diner or I don't understand what bistro is compared to
I'm not sure either. I looked it up, and it said it was a small, inexpensive restaurant.
Well, gee whiz. That's... All right, we'll allow that. So bistro, go on.
But anyway, I mean, it sounds French and affected and whatever. But the first time I ever heard the word, I thought it would be a row of beasts.
Yeah.
So what would be the funniest way to get that across in a single panel?
The funniest way, well, is if you're trying to submit that to the New Yorker, is don't do a pun. That would, best way. They're not big on puns over at the New Yorker. Yeah, I don't know just off the top of my head, I'm not sure what I would do with bistro. I would probably forget about the row, but I would change the bistro to a bistro, which is a bistro that serves primarily beasts. And beasts would be the clientele, but there would be no beasts on the menu.
Okay.
Because only it would be a vegan menu. I have no idea where I would go with that necessarily, but it's all yours. So I'm not going to steal your idea. You can be reassured of that. So.
Okay. Well, if they won't publish puns, then yeah, there's no reason to steal it from me.
The thing about the single panel gag idea gag is that with something like that, with Bistro, I could easily see the audience having to think about it. And you'd look at that and go, oh, right, Bistro. And then you'd get the reaction that you never want, which is, oh, yeah, I see what you did there. The reaction you want is somebody laughing, actually, or, at the very least giggling or chuckling. But what you don't want is them going, oh, yeah, I see that. Although that's not the worst reaction. The worst reaction is when they suggest their own jokes, which seems to be happening a lot lately online. I'm getting this thing where people think everything is a caption contest, even if it already has a caption. And as the creator, I get a little bit annoyed by that. I do sometimes do caption contests for the New Yorker, but that's fine. There is no caption. When I already have a caption and they start suggesting new ones, it gets a little bit annoying. Yeah. Cartoonist etiquette. Let's just put that out there. When you meet a cartoonist, maybe don't do that.
Yeah. Don't try to improve on their gags.
Yeah, the one I hate is when they say there's a joke in there about something. Like, no, there's already a joke there. I gave you a joke. Don't look for another joke in there. But the thing about the single panel gag is it's a very unique art form. It's its own animal, really. You have a picture. Sometimes you have words, not always, but sometimes you have a line. And what you have is this, you're trying to hook into this split-second reaction. You're trying to get people to look at the picture and absorb the information and read the line, and in that just like less than a second moment, get it and laugh. And it's so hard to do. It's really, really easy to do badly. Like, there's a lot of bad cartoons. Many of them drawn by, and if you talk to anyone else at the New Yorker who does this, they'll tell you they go through a lot of cartoons to get to a good one. And if that's what we all do as professionals, and you have to not be afraid to do a crummy cartoon to get to a good one. But when you do it, it's such a trick you've pulled off. I think it's like riding a bull for 7 seconds. And you've done this amazing thing, and I think we're all addicted to that. I think we're all at the New Yorker. I know my friends. We're kind of addicted to that thrill of like, I did that. I went from a blank piece of paper and my own silly doodling to a thing on a page that's now making somebody I don't know on the subway laugh. And I've seen people on the subway reading the New Yorker and laughing at a cartoon. Not mine, but somebody's. Actually, I've seen someone reading my cartoon on the subway, actually, and toyed with approaching them. But of course I didn't. Why would loser move that would be? Oh my God. Can you imagine if
so how do you like my cartoon?
Cartoonist walked up to you on the subway and said, I did that. Of course, I know at least one person, I won't name him, who did that once. But I'm not going to say who it is. But yeah, I never do that. But I did surreptitiously snap a picture of her reading I cropped out her face. So don't worry, I'm not a violator of privacy. Sure I am. So I think we're all kind of addicted to that thing of, I somehow managed to, with a few lines and a few words, evoke an involuntary nerve reaction in a complete stranger. It's extraordinary when you really think about what that does there, and you can't take it for granted. And I'm amazed that I did it even once, and now I think I've gotten. I don't remember. I lost count of how many I've had published in the magazine, but it's over 100. And I keep coming back, and I think we all keep coming back because we want that feeling of, oh my God, I did that. I just sold a cartoon recently, which is going to be published probably pretty soon, which is another take on the guy on the deserted island. You know, these tropes that get used over and over in the New Yorker, the psychiatrist couch, the guy crawling through the desert for water, and one of them is the guy on the island. And some people will come up to me and say, why are you still doing the island? I've opened up the New Yorker and all I see is this island over and over again. Enough with the island already. But to us, that's the challenge of it. It's that thrill of, after 90 years of island cartoons, I came up with a new one that had never been done before. You know, that's amazing. And that's like climbing Everest for us. You can actually come up with an island joke that no one's thought of before and a new take on the island. And we love that. So those tired old tropes, as some people describe them, to us, those are gold. We love those because if we actually manage to climb those little mountains, it's the sense of accomplishment is incredible.
Wow. Yeah. I've certainly seen those tropes in even cartoons outside of the New Yorker too. They show up everywhere, and certainly
used to be cartoons outside the New Yorker.
I think. Well, as I was thinking about this kind of single panel cartoons, kind of in general, I feel like Gary Larson's The Far Side is still kind of influencing a lot of the people who are doing single panels, even 20 years after it ended.
Sure.
I'm reading like on Go Comics. I'm reading a couple of one panel comics, Loose Parts by Dave Blazik and Speed Bump by Dave Coverley. I don't know why they're both named Dave, but both of those cartoons are kind of Far-Sidey also.
Yeah, I know both those guys a little, and they're both very funny. And yeah, it's sort of in bit in the mold of the Far Side. The Far Side, however, was very much in the mold of Beek Laban. Beek Laban was the person who, I don't know if people know who he is, but he's most now known for Cat Calendar cartoons, or coffee mugs and drapery and bed sheets and everything with those cats on them. But Laban, when he wasn't drawing those cats and making millions of dollars from them, was one of the weirdest cartoonists who ever lived. He was a true genius, a towering genius. But among other things, he invented the format of the cartoon with the third person caption, where you'd see something going on and there would be a narrative caption, which an example of, I can actually give you an example of that. If you will bear with me just a moment, I can give you an example of one of those.
Yeah, because Gary Larson did that a lot.
Well, that became his bread and butter. But here's one. There's a cartoon of Beek Laban did where it's a man and a woman standing there, and I can't describe them. They just look rather odd. The man is wearing suspenders. He has unkempt hair. The woman seems to have stepped out of 1965 with a beehive hairdo. She's holding something in her hand. But the caption is, Chapter 4, Scott laughed hard when Wanda brought home the contaminated cheese. No one had done a cartoon with a narrating caption before like that. That was a completely new approach to it. So he very much invented that. And also kind of, his visual style. I think Gary Larson was great, but in his early work, he appropriated his visual style very much from Laban. There's one where he has there's a woman in her garden, and there's what looks like a cabbage patch, and there are two human heads sticking up out of the cabbage patch. And the caption is, "You may well wonder what we are doing in your garden," said Andrew, the elder of the two. That's it. That's one of the strangest, most bizarre conceptual. It's like a scene from something where you think there should be more to it. But that was all there was. And also, I love the detail of, said Andrew, the elder of the two. Like when I was a kid and I saw this, what enchanted me most about it, I think, was that extra detail. And you can see from that one of them, the one who's talking, does have a mustache. He looks a little more sophisticated. He's clearly the elder of the two. It's a little more mature, but it's just throwing that in there. It makes it so, it suggests like a longer story that you never get to hear. You may well wonder what we were doing in your garden, said Andrew, the elder of the two. And there's nothing after that. We never find out why they're in her garden or how they got there, or whether they dug themselves in or came up from underneath. We never know. They're just, their heads are sticking up where cabbages would be, and he was a master of just these strange things. So, I grew up reading Mad Magazine, but really, I mean, Kleban was the gold standard for me. When I saw his cartoons in probably, the late 70s, I was so blown away by them. I've never seen anything like that before. He had a kind of thing that I think separated him from other cartoonists. And it was the thing that appealed to me in like Monty Python and Steve Martin, which was this real absurdity to his humor. It was a true sense of otherworldliness. Like I always wondered if he was a human being, because he could have stepped off a spaceship. He looked at the world through such a weird lens. It's like he had an incredible Zen-like detachment, is how I would describe it. He seemed to me making fun of the world, not from in it, but from way high above it, looking out and seeing us all walking around like little stupid wind-up toys. That was how he saw the world. And like certain like observational comics or cartoonists make fun of certain aspects of life. And Kleban was different because to him, it was all ridiculous. The whole plan of having a planet with people walking around on it, wearing suits and exchanging money for goods and services, that whole plan that we have was insane to him. That was what was so appealing to me about him, his stuff was just, it was so impossibly weird. But he could also be like the master of sort of a gag, like a simple gag. There's one cartoon he drew where it's a woman who clearly is a lady of the evening, and she's in front of a cheap hotel, leaning up against a wall, waiting for clients. Right above her head, hanging on the wall, is a diploma. So she has credentials for what she's a professional, and it's such a simple gag. Anyone could get that gag, but at the same time, he would draw a cartoon with a woman knitting chickens, like roast chickens, but she's knitting them out of yarn, and there's no further explanation for it. It was just this impossibly weird imagination that he had, and I loved his work so much, and I think it doesn't take a trained eye to see that influence in my work. I think anyone who looks at my work could say, "Oh yeah, Kleban, for sure." And I don't mind that so much. That's fine. It's if I'm gonna be compared to anyone, that's the most flattering assessment there.
Coming up, other influences on Joe's work, his experience with doing a daily cartoon, and more. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles, if these shows have helped you get a new perspective on something or to discover something new, help us keep going with a monthly donation via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. If everyone listening gave just $3 a month, it would make a big difference. We'd be able to reach several of our Patreon goals and bring you more content. If and when we hit our next goal, I'll make available the first 2.5 years of Deconstructing Comics, over 120 episodes that are currently missing from our website. We'd really appreciate it if everyone pitched in a few bucks a month to get us to that goal.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul.
To the Bat Poles!
The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Poles podcast. These guys do a good job, writes Acello. Who knew that the Batman TV show was such a wellspring of insight into Hollywood trivia, 60s counterculture, sexual mores, and even musical analysis? The Young brothers know their stuff, says Professor Allen. It is a great mix of nostalgia, analysis, and fun. Highly recommended. You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com.
Batman, the answer to a policeman's prayer.
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Batpoles.
Well, you mentioned by email before a number of your influences, and I was looking at those cartoonists and at some of your stuff online, and I don't know, I mean, some of them are pretty bizarre, like Charles Addams. Yours, I didn't feel like it was bizarre in quite the same way. It's a little more kind of quirky. I mean, yours are very funny, but I didn't quite see the connection to some of the ones that you were citing as influences. It felt a little bit different flavor to me.
I guess. I mean, I do try whenever possible to make sure that something impossible is going on in a cartoon. That's humor that appeals to me and always made me laugh. So I mean, there's some other cartoonists, their stuff is a little more grounded, and I always think that something impossible should be happening, even if it's just somebody saying something that they could never say in real life, you know. But I do try that. As far as like someone like Charles Addams, I think the way that he's influenced me is that I try to draw well.
Okay.
He was a beautiful draftsman, as was Kleban, and I think everybody on my sort of, list of influences could draw well. He was a great draftsman, and he had a very deliberate way of presenting his work. It wasn't the other school of cartooning, which is sort of the James Thurber sort of, quick, spontaneous sketch, which is wonderful in its own way. But I always sort of connected more with that kind of deliberate, detailed style that Addams had. And of course, Addams is the one New Yorker cartoonist that people know, even if they don't know him, they know him because of the Addams family.
Sure.
You explain to people where the Addams family comes from, and they're very surprised. Like, really? That's cartoons from the New Yorker? Yes, actually it is. So even people who don't know who Charles Addams is, they already know his humor style and his work. And Gay and Wilson, the same thing. I think he was sort of the successor to Addams in a way, in that he always had this very, very strange sense of humor. He would always do stuff with monsters and aliens in it. And if I haven't had monsters or aliens in as many of my cartoons as I'd like, well, that's my failure, I would say.
It's your oversight, yeah.
I would like to have an alien.
Gotta amp up the aliens, yeah.
I think so. Well, I'm also somewhat limited by the fact that it's what the New Yorker will take. So I might every week we go in there and we submit a batch of cartoons, and we hope they take at least one, and most weeks they take none. And you try a lot of things. You might have a sort of an observational gag. You might have something where a couple talking in a bed and saying something. Although I always try, again, I do try to make it something that could not happen in real life. There's sometimes I'll think of a one-liner or a wisecrack, but then I think, well, if somebody said that, they might be making a wisecrack, and that's just not as interesting to me as the wisecrack that they're describing actually happening. So a lot of times I'll submit a cartoon that is somewhat grounded in reality, and that will be what the New Yorker wants to publish that week. And I will say yes to that because it's my livelihood and this is what I do. And I think of myself as a professional, and I pride myself on being a professional. So and I will do many kinds of things. But if I only submitted weird drawings, probably not as many of them would actually be published. And it's not that they're bad. It's just that they already have a lot of people doing that, and so they try to mix it up a little. You know?
Do they? What do I say? Do events in the news tend to sort of guide what they buy? I mean, like if there was a big tragedy last week, does that kind of change what they might choose?
Yes and no. They do topical cartoons more in the pages of the magazine than I think they used to. Although those work better when they're just sort of general. Paul Noth, who's a friend of mine, has some of the most amazing cartoons about this election year, none of which refer directly to the election year. He has one cartoon where there's a group of sheep and they're looking at what looks like a campaign poster, and the campaign poster has a wolf pictured on it, and the slogan is "I will eat you." And one of the sheep is saying to the other one, "He tells it like it is." Now, there's no way to read that as not being about Donald Trump, and more specifically about Trump supporters saying, well, at least he's honest, and says it is. Yeah, meanwhile, the things he's honest about are horrifying. But that seems to be, a great approach to that kind of topical cartoon. I tend not to usually do topical cartoons, but I was the New Yorker's daily cartoonist for 2 months, where I was doing cartoons for the website, and there the intention is to be topical, and so I did have the chance at that point to address things that were going on every day politically or socially or whatever was going on in social media, and I was proud of some of those. Some of those I think I got across some pretty good points.
Well, that sounds. Well, of course, syndicated cartoonists do it for years, but coming up with something every day must be a challenge.
Well, it was only 2 months, and I know there's some people who do it their whole lives, and I'm amazed by that. It was very difficult to do editorial cartoons. I have to say that, and I admire people who can get up every single day and crank out a cartoon based on that day's headlines. It's amazing to me. It was a challenge that I'd never done topical cartoons before that. I had never tried to do current events or editorial cartoons, so I was keen to do it because I thought, I bet I can't do this. Let's see. As it turned out, I managed to get through it, so I think I was okay, and some of them were actually kind of good. So.
One of your influences that we haven't talked about yet. Talk about Charles Rodriguez.
I saw Rodriguez. Rodriguez's work was one that I saw when I was very young, looking at the National Lampoon. Because I didn't see the New Yorker for many years, but I did see, when I was a teenager, I saw the National Lampoon and Playboy. And I was one of those young men who read Playboy for two reasons. And the other one was cartoons, because they, had a great tradition of cartoons in the magazine. Unfortunately, sadly, they've done away with cartoons at this point. Yeah, I know, that's really sad. Just incredible cartoons throughout the history of that magazine. Hefner himself was a cartoonist and really appreciated cartoons. And to go back to Gahan Wilson, he hired Gahan Wilson before he had published even the first issue of Playboy, and then had Gahan Wilson in every single issue from that point on for like 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I saw Charles Rodriguez it was, I don't know if he was ever in Playboy, but he was in the National Lampoon for sure. And he did a number of things in the National Lampoon. He did single panel gags, which were always, because it was the National Lampoon, of course, he always, they were very adult and very, what's a good word for them? There was just a collection of his cartoons that just came out called Gag on This, that was edited by my friend Bob Fingerman. And on the cover of that, they describe Rodriguez's cartoons as degenerate. And I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. I'm going to say his cartoons were degenerate. There was no subject matter that was too low for him, which is, and the weird thing is, of course, in his real life, he was a devout Catholic and a very religious man. And but he has Rodriguez. I'll give you an example of a Rodriguez cartoon. There's a a man there's a woman pushing a wheelchair, and in the wheelchair is I can't even describe what this is. It looks like it was a person at one point, but it's just sort of a grotesque-looking pile of something or other. And they're in a law office, and the attorney is saying, "Offhand, I'd say you have an excellent case, Mr. Vogel. How long ago was this autopsy performed on you?" So, I mean, that's a hard cartoon there, and that's the kind of thing Rodriguez would do on a regular basis. You know, nothing was too gross or awful for him. And then he would also do for the National Lampoon, and this was probably the thing that I loved the most, was he would do these ongoing strips, and they would be ongoing stories, which again also you can find in a collection edited by my friend Bob Fingerman. Just throw that in there. And these would be the weirdest ongoing stories. One of them was an ongoing serial about a detective, hard-boiled sort of noir detective who was in an iron lung. And another one was about a little girl who was born and was the ugliest little girl ever. And he depicted her by not showing her face. He would just have a thing over her face saying, "I'm sorry, this is too grotesque to actually draw." But you would see people's reactions, and and then he had another one. It was there was a pair of Siamese twins who it's a really long saga that he would draw these things out, and they would get weirder and weirder and weirder. And I just loved this stuff. He had an amazing imagination.
Wow. Okay. And apparently he did a lot of cartoons for a stereo magazine too. There are all these cartoons about stereo equipment. Yeah,
he did a lot of those. He had sort of an ongoing gig doing that. I think I forget what the name of the magazine was, but yeah, and he was, I admire that because he was a professional. Again, he drew cartoons. He would draw these incredibly filthy, degenerate cartoons, but then he would also draw things that were very marketable. He was a great draftsman. His drawings were beautiful. He had a very unique line. He had this very, very unique line where anything he drew, you could see his hand in it. And I always love that, whenever the artist's hand is on display in every single line. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it is distinctive. By the way, it was Stereo Review magazine.
Stereo Review, right, was it? Yeah. And, and he was a professional. And that's what I'd like to be. I'd model myself after that. I think I would like to be a working cartoonist. So I certainly would have no shame about doing stereo cartoons myself. Why not?
Or do cartoons in stereo. How would that work?
Oh, that would be easy. You would just Xerox it and then have two people come into a room and read it out loud.
Okay, that works. Now, yeah. Are you doing? I mean, is this your full-time job? Are you? Is this your day job?
Pretty much, yeah. I've been very lucky that I've managed to draw cartoons and not have another job to support myself. Currently, that's where things are currently. We'll see where things go, but I get around that by living very, very, very badly.
I see.
So that's my fix on that. I live literally in a cave in Queens, New York, and I forage wild berries for food. So,
wow, wouldn't think you'd find many of those in Queens, but
you don't. You don't. There's that occasional discarded pizza slice.
It sounds more likely.
I keep my overhead down, literally, because I live in a basement, and I don't live lavishly. So, this is my advice to young people: if you want to live not very lavishly, become a cartoonist.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's your gateway to modest living.
What kind of work, like comics or cartoons, in terms of genre or whatever, what would you like to do that you haven't done yet?
I would like to get into doing more sequential work. What I ideally would like to do is adapt a story. I think that would be a great way to go. For me, eventually I'd like to write my own fiction. The one thing I've thought about is I don't think I'd want to get into memoir or autobiography just yet. Maybe someday. I know a lot of people are sort of urging me to that and saying, why don't you do some autobiographical comics? But the one thing I've ever done that I would call autobiographical was completely fictional, which was I did a page for the New Yorker a few years ago called How We Do It. And it was a day in the life of a New Yorker cartoonist, or it was a week in the life of a New Yorker cartoonist, and it went through the entire process of doing cartoons on a weekly basis, and every part of it was completely fake and made up. And that's kind of how I think. I don't know that I want to reveal truths because I think they would be, among other things, boring. So I would rather write and draw fiction and make things up. So there's a part of me that wants to tell stories. I think I'd like to adapt something, preferably something public domain that I don't have to pay anyone for. That would be nice. I know a lot of graphic novels have been adapted into movies. How come nobody does that in reverse? Like I would like somebody to take a movie and just adapt it into a graphic novel. That's something I've never seen.
Well, I mean, the original Star Wars, I guess all the Star Wars movies were then turned into comics.
Yeah, I guess those are the comics adaptations that came out in concurrence with the movie. But let's say like a remake of an old film. But why not? Why remake it as a movie? Why not remake it as a comic book? That would be interesting, I think.
It's cheaper. Well,
it's a lot cheaper, yeah. And if you're just one person with no budget, that's a way to go, or maybe I just take something like some classic tale that everybody knows and adapt that. That's something I think I might like to get into.
I see.
Any publishers who are interested, I'm here. Contact me.
What do you think you would adapt? Any story come to mind?
I'd like to do the classic nursery rhymes. Like Mother Goose and Humpty Dumpty and Little Bo Peep and things like that. But I'd like to do them in my own way.
I see. Would this be for an adult audience then, rather than for kids?
I would hope it was for an adult audience. Adults might recoil from it. I don't know. maybe only appealing to kids, in spite of myself. I think it reminds me of the Stephen Wright used to say, "I've written several children's books, not intentionally."
Oh yeah, Stephen Wright. So alongside your cartooning, what inspired you to start a comedy music podcast?
Oh, that's just my own narcissism and desire to put my voice on a recording and get it out there for people to listen to. Well, it started out with me, as I said earlier, going on Alex Robinson's podcast. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then he created an offshoot of that. Him and his partner, Pete, created an offshoot of that where they went through the entire Beatles catalog.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember them mentioning that on your show.
Alphabetical. And so I went on as a guest on their show, and we talked about a couple of Beatles songs, in particular the song Birthday. Mm-hmm. And I started to analyze the lyrics of Birthday, and I came up with a take on it that I don't think I had heard before, which was that Birthday was actually a pretty dark song. And the character in Birthday is kind of a predator. And I thought that was pretty funny. And I thought, hey, this is a good idea for a show. I should do a whole show where I interpret and reinterpret and possibly misinterpret the lyrics of classic songs. But I thought I don't want to do the Beatles songs because Alex was already doing Beatles songs. So I decided to go with the classic rock genre because I thought these songs were all very familiar to people. They were kind of songs that everybody seems to know. If you walk out of your house and grab anyone off the street and say, "What are the words to Hotel California?" That person will know all the words to Hotel California. But then you say to them, "So do you like that song?" And about half of them will say, "God, no." I hate it. Yet they know all the words to it. So I thought there was kind of that thing of like these songs that have been played for 40 years or sometimes in some cases, and that everybody seems to know, but we just kind of take for granted. Have we ever really listen to the words to these songs. They're playing in Walgreens on the PA system when you go shopping for Q-tips, but you pay attention to the lyrics ever. So it seemed like a good idea for a show, and it's mostly worked out. I wish there were more listeners, of course, but it's been a lot of fun to do, and it's also become my only means of social interaction at this point. So,
well, yeah, cartooning is a lonely job.
It is, and it's the only way I can hang out with my friends is if I get them behind a microphone. So that was another thing. It was just an excuse to call people I know who I thought were funny and hang out with them and goof around behind a microphone.
I see. Okay,
and it's on iTunes and Stitcher. Songs You're Sick Of, the show where we discuss, dissect, and dismember classic rock. Did I mention that?
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Okay.
So what's coming next from you?
What's coming next for me? Well, it's going to be more cartoons in the New Yorker. That's the thing about the New Yorker is I don't really work there. I'm a freelancer, which means I'll never be fired, which means I'm going to keep going back week after week after week. And I'm fine with that. I'll be taking that challenge of, can I come up with, after 10 years of doing this, can I still come up with more stuff? Because there's that addictive thrill when you do.
Check out Joe's cartoons at joedator.com. Also, before long, probably before the end of October, I'll be appearing on Joe's podcast, Songs You're Sick Of, discussing the 1983 hit by Styx, Mr. Roboto. You can write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. Just behind this episode in the feed, you'll find the latest episode of our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics, where Mulele and I critique comics by listeners. We talked about a well-drawn, Western-themed comic called Pariah, Missouri. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. This coming Thursday on To the Bat Polls, the Batman cast pretends Chad and Jeremy are the Beatles, and Batman and Catwoman get their mushiest yet in The Cat's Meow and the Bat's Kowtow. Look up To the Bat Polls wherever you find your podcasts, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. Next week, the second of our 2 talks with single-panel cartoonists, and an artist you asked for in our recent survey, an interview with Bizarro creator Dan Piraro. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.